this is Shaina Lupango, and I am with my group mates Hannah Colompiano and Rochelle Eugenio, and we are from BS Psychology 3.7. And our topic for this video presentation is about Pavlov's experiment, classical conditioning. And before that, we would like to introduce Dr. Ivan Pavlov biography. Ivan Pavlov is the father of conditioning. Like many great scientific advances, Pavlovian conditioning, or aka classical conditioning, was accidentally discovered. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was a Russian physiologist and not a psychologist. He also won a Nobel Prize on 1904 for his research on digestions and salivation. He discovered the concept of conditioned reflex, which is a learned response to a stimulus that is previously neutral. He also trained dogs to salivate at the sound of a metronome or a buzzer by pairing it with food, creating an association in their brains. He also studied a different type of stimuli, including light, sound, and electric shock, on the behavior and physiology of animals and humans. He was also the pioneer of experimental psychology and influenced many other scientists, including John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner, who was developed behaviorism. So let's now focus on the main discussion of this presentation. So what is the discovery under Pavlov's experiment? During the 1890s, Pavlov researched salivation in dogs, the response to being fed. He inserted a small test tube into the cheek of each dog to measure saliva when the dogs were fed, with a powder made from meat. He realized that the dogs had learned to associate the sound of the bell with the presence of food, and thus began to salivate at the sounds of the bell alone. This led him to conclude that learning could occur through the association of two stimuli, which he called classical conditioning. So how was it discovered? Pavlov's experiment involved ringing a bell before feeding his food. After a few repetitions, the dogs began to salivate at the sound of the bell alone, even when no food was present. So this experiment demonstrated that a previously neutral stimulus, which is the bell, could become a conditioned stimulus that elicited a response, which is the salivation, after being paired with an unconditioned stimulus, which is the food. So when Pavlov discovered that any object or event that the dogs learned to associate with food, that would trigger the same response. So this experiment led to the discovery of classical conditioning, which is a learning process. So accordingly, Pavlov also devoted the rest of his career to studying this type of learning.
Now, who exactly are the people responsible for the development of classical conditioning? Classical conditioning is a concept introduced by Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist who experimented with dogs in the late 19th century. This concept involved several influential contributors. Other notable figures include John B. Watson, an American psychologist who further developed and popularized classical conditioning and behaviorism. Watson extended the concept and principle of classical conditioning to describe human behavior. His research established the groundwork for behaviorism, emphasizing the study of behavior as a response to external stimuli. Ivan Pavlov made significant contributions to the field of psychology with his work on classical conditioning and his famous experiment involving salivating dogs. But there is a dark side to his experiments, particularly regarding the Pavlovian experiment on orphan children and animals. He surgically removed a portion of his dog's throat so that when they ate, the food will drop out before reaching their stomach. He attached a collection of tubes to their bodies so he could measure various secretions. It traumatized the animals through different distressing methods. Additionally, there is an issue with one of his students, Nikolai Krasnogorsky. He proposed to replicate Pavlov's original study, and Pavlov agreed to supervise the Krasnogorsky plan. They conducted the same salivation experiment on the children as he did on his dogs. The way in which they performed the experiments on children and dogs would be considered harsh, cruel, unethical, and inhumane. Dogs and children were treated unfairly, and there were unnecessary surgical procedures performed in experiments.
Ano nga ba ang mga contributions ng classical conditioning in this present time? In today's world, classical conditioning can be applied in various fields such as advertising, education, and mental health treatment. The approach that classical conditioning gives us can be very helpful in studying and treating mental health problems like phobias. Treatments such as exposure therapy work by counter-conditioning responses. In this treatment, a person who suffers from a phobia is gradually exposed to the object or situation that they fear while remaining in a controlled environment. They confront their fear repeatedly until they no longer get scared. In educational settings, classical conditioning can help students make good connections with what they are learning. If a student is afraid of public speaking, yet must give a presentation in front of the class, the teacher can help by creating positive stimuli related to public speaking. Over time, the student can begin to view public speaking as an enjoyable experience rather than a frightening one. In terms of advertising, they encourage customers to purchase their products through the use of classical conditioning. For example, advertisers often choose uplifting and happy music because they want viewers to associate the ad with an optimistic emotion. In turn, people will connect that company or product with positive emotions. Ano naman yung relevance ng classical conditioning? Classical conditioning is often regarded as the most important discovery in the history of psychology because it serves as the foundation of behavioral psychology. Even the majority of psychologists acknowledge that classical conditioning is one of the foundations of learning. It is because it has been used in a variety of ways, from helping those with mental health problems to influencing the treatment of psychological disorders and enhancing the general public's knowledge of how the brain stores and retrieves information. And today, Pavlov's classical conditioning has been part of our daily lives. However, nakakaramdam ako ng lungkot because of what Pavlov's did sa mga human at animal subjects niya. Yes, his experiment made a great contribution to the field of psychology. But I hope na magkaroon tayo ng enough awareness of the unethical practices na ginawa ni Pavlov and even sa other professionals na nagpa-perform ng mga unethical practices. Having this awareness will help us to do what is right and keep us from doing what is wrong when we are conducting research and experiments. And sana hindi rin mawala sa atin ang pusong may malasakit sa iba.
So thank you so much for watching our video presentation. Have a great day.